It is Friday, September 12th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another Borderlands 4 episode of LTPS. We've got a lot going on from this past week, so let's begin, as always, with a very brief reminder for the PS Plus Essential September lineup, which those games are live on PSN. Make sure you claim those. Also, this coming Tuesday on the 16th, we have the PS Plus Extra and Premium September lineup going live as well. And I believe this is the lowest amount of games we have ever had in a single month on Extra and Premium. So for PS Plus Extra, we have 7 games total. That is WWE 2K25, Persona 5 Tactica, Green Hell, Fate Samurai Remnant, Crow Country, The Invincible, and Conscript. And then going into PS Plus Premium, we have Legacy of Kain Defiance for PlayStation 2. Great to see that game, but that is the only game available on Premium. So yeah, 8 games total. I'm pretty sure that's the lowest amount. Otherwise, it was like 9 or 10 before, but really low this time around. The standouts, I think, is probably going to be, WWE. If you don't buy those games every single year, then it's always fun to jump into those. I know some folks really love those wrestling games, but also Persona 5 Tactica, Green Hell is really fun. Crow Country probably stands out the most to me. That's that very cool looking PS1 survival horror-esque game. That game got a lot of attention when it came out last year, so that's probably the one to play, and I hear it's relatively short, another weekend style game, so that is probably something that you might want to check out. But otherwise, we are very light for September when it comes to PS Plus games. Moving on to our first news story, Sony has finally fixed the issue where PS3 premium avatars were missing from modern PlayStation systems. So PS4, 5, the PlayStation mobile app, if you have any sort of premium or even free avatars from the PS3 and PS Vita days, those were not showing up on modern systems. Now, we were able to verify back in July when the problem happened that they weren't totally gone, but it was a weird thing where they just didn't show up anymore. So in theory, if you had access to a legacy platform, you could go back into your download history, scroll all the way down to find the avatars again, reactivate them, and assign them from there. So you didn't lose them, but they just made it way harder to reassign them. So now that's addressed, or at least it seems like for most people, they should now be showing up under account management and your avatars when you go to the selection screen. You should have all your premium avatars show up again. So you can probably verify that from the PS mobile app or PlayStation 5. So just another one of those weird things on the back end where as far as licensing and what you see and how that stuff appears, this is not uncommon for Sony. It happens more than we care to admit, but at the very minimum, it seems like they are addressing this problem. Next up, Sony has shadow dropped a new mobile app for iOS and Android called the PlayStation Family app, and this is exactly what you think it is. It's a way for families to now manage child accounts on PlayStation, which it seems incredibly robust. So there's like a guided setup tour you can do for creating child accounts on PlayStation. Then you get real-time notifications through the app, daily and weekly activity reports on gameplay hours, and then you can do settings for playtime limitations or specific days, prevent access to specific games, setting spending limitations as well, and being able to refund accounts over time. And then you can set the social settings and privacy settings all from the mobile app. It seems like a very robust and handy tool for parents or big households where you have a number of kids playing on PlayStation. So it's actually pretty interesting. I would assume it works quite well. Not a parent, so I don't know. I can't speak to the usability of it, but it does seem to be very feature complete, and it's cool to have this now finally here for parents that have a lot of child accounts on their PlayStation consoles. Moving on to Ghost of Yotei and Sucker Punch news. I did miss this from LTPS filming last Friday, or Thursday it would have been, but that was around the time when the press got access to the game, and we know the review embargo lifts on September 25th at 9 a.m. ET. So that's pretty standard for the amount of time that the press has with big AAA PS Studio games, and also when the reviews do go live, so there's always some confidence when the reviews drop well in advance of the game coming out, so that's still good to see. We also saw PlayStation drop a 10-minute video called Journey Through the Edge of Japan, and it's literally just 10 minutes of slow panning shots showing off the open world backdropped with the beautiful OST. I mean, this game is probably going to be very similar to Tsushima as far as just the world, the way it feels, the openness, the beauty of it. The game is very flattering to look at. Like, it's gorgeous, and you can see that in this 10-minute video. But more pertinently, we also had a 125 rapid-fire questions with Nate Fox. This is from MinMax and Ben Hansen. They do this every so often with big games. So Ben was speaking with the co-creative director, Nate Fox, at Sucker Punch, and just a handful of things we cherry-picked out of these 125 rapid-fire questions. We did find out that the map in Yotei is about the same size as Tsushima, so same ballpark there. He was also asked about GTA 6 and how the studio felt about that. Sucker Punch apparently had a multi-month hangover when GTA 6 was delayed, so he jokingly said that was a great day. It's always funny hearing like other studios talk about this in a very open way of like, it doesn't matter how big the studio is, GTA 6 is definitely an outlier and anomaly. You really don't want to be next to that game no matter who you are. And so even they were like, man, that was a great day when that happened. We had a multi-month hangover. But anyway, speaking more on side stuff in the game, so things like Fox Dens and Bamboo Strikes, we do know those are in the game, but apparently it's going to be less than Tsushima for those items. They want to offer more variety. And then he was also asked about the playable flashbacks in the game. How many are there? And all we know is there's more than 5. So it sounds like that is going to be a pretty large sequence and part of the game. And he was also asked this theoretical question of, if an all-hands-on meeting was held and it was announced that Sucker Punch was doing a new Sly Cooper game, how much of the staff would be hyped about that? And Nate said approximately 10% of the studio would be psyched. Which Ben responded saying like, what? But Nate responded back with saying, hey, it's been a long time. And so that's that's what he said about Sly Cooper. And he was also asked about if Sucker Punch would be okay with another studio remastering the infamous series. And Nate said, that'd be great, which is pretty short, sweet, to the point. I mean, obviously, I think they would be okay with that. Especially as far as like remastering or port works would go. You just have to have Sony step in and actually finance that and find a different work for hire studio to take on that work, which I would love to see them do. It's kind of shocking that we went through the entire PS4 cycle and all of PlayStation 5 and that has not happened, but you know, there's that. Speaking on the Sly Cooper answer though, I mean, that definitely is something where, as we've seen from all the internal studios, when they were previously Worldwide Studios, now PlayStation Studios, they've all sort of really matured past their PS2 platformers. And it's one of those things where I love those games a lot, but there's been a lot of turnover within those studios as well. I'm sure they have a lot of nostalgia and love and reverence for their own IP, but you know, it's one of those things where, yeah, it's not entirely surprising that they might not want to necessarily go back to those games. And also it would be a lot of new staff anyway. Even though there definitely are some long-term staff at these teams that did work on a Sly or a Jack or a Ratchet, you know, that's still always the thing that I find is very noteworthy. A lot of those staff at these teams eventually climb that corporate ladder. They might have been programmers and now they're leads on, you know, things like Yotei and Spider-Man 2, you know what I mean? So that's cool, but obviously they've sort of graduated beyond that stuff. Moving on to Naughty Dog and Intergalactic, where recently Neil Druckmann was speaking with Variety about the Sunday's Emmy ceremony and also his work on The Last of Us HBO and now departing before Season 3, but also being asked about their next game project, which is Intergalactic: The Heretic Prophet. And so he said, and I quote, "What can I say and not say? I can tell you we're in the thick of it. We're making it, we're playing it, we're firing on all cylinders. I've said this before, but I really mean it. I'm really feeling it right now. It's the most ambitious game we've ever made. It's the most expensive game we've ever made, maybe the most expensive by the time we finish it." Now, he was also asked about the gameplay, how it's apparently going to have the deepest gameplay in Naughty Dog history, and Neil said, and I quote, "You could look at our previous titles and see the evolution of going from Uncharted, where we're really cutting our teeth on realistic character action game, third-person shooter, combined with emotional storytelling. With The Last of Us, we added some RPG elements, we started playing with wide linear layouts. Continue that trajectory forward, add sci-fi, and you start to get the sense of what we're doing. And then we've gotten even more ambitious than that. So really looking forward to see how it all comes together. I think you're all going to be pleasantly surprised by it." That is the one aspect I am so curious about, more so than anything else. Like, I don't want to say I don't care about the story and what this thing may or may not be by the time it comes out. Once we learn more, that's probably where I will get more excited as far as, like, typical Naughty Dog fashion of trying to tell a rich, engaging plot line with these deep character arcs and maybe bold storytelling that goes into a direction that divides audiences. Like, don't get me wrong, I probably will get more excited as we learn more about whatever that is, but with this game, it's just, I think we're all ready to see something very different and against the grain of what Naughty Dog typically does in the gameplay department, and that's what I want to see. I want to see something just different enough to where, and I don't know what it's going to look like. Like, in my head, I'm like, okay, is this thing more kinetic feeling, maybe more fast-paced like a Returnal, or is it maybe a bit more nuanced and methodical like these very high-stakes combat encounters you see from FromSoft games? Because we're hearing that's a big part of how the game is inspired in the gameplay department. Does that just simply extend to the world as far as the player has a lot of agency on where they go, how they advance the plot line, and, you know, things like that? Is it minimal HUD? But, like, again, what does combat look like? I have so many questions, and that's the part that is the most exciting to me right now, is hearing them say this is the deepest gameplay we've done for in our history, basically. So I cannot wait to see more of this game. I sincerely hope it is soon. Next up, we have a minor rumor here for Insomniac Games and Marvel's Wolverine, where so far the game is apparently in very good shape, based on the words from Tom Henderson speaking on the Insider Gaming podcast, where he mentions they spoke with a few playtesters on this game, and they think the game looks fantastic. And that's really all that was said. Those are the headlines, is that playtesters think the game right now looks fantastic. And that's off the back of the news from Tom Henderson previously that the next trailer for this game is complete, and it should be appearing during the next State of Play, which is planned for the end of this month, September. So we should be seeing the game fairly soon in the most really, what is more so a re-reveal, because we had a cinematic trailer back in 2021. They pretty much had nothing for the game to show outside of that. It's been years later where they've actually got something substantial to finally show off, and if it doesn't show up at the State of Play, then probably the TGAs in December, which, you know, I'd love to see the game sooner rather than later, but that's part of what we heard with this game, is that because of the Insomniac breach, where, sure, we got a lot of very early gameplay footage, not on Insomniac's terms, and also a basic premise of, you know, the plot line, you know, the characters that will appear, things like that. Conceivably, there was an internal delay to manage and rewrite and move things around and subvert expectations of what people were not supposed to see to begin with. So there's also a good chance that by the time they do show more of this game, it might look a bit different from what some were expecting if you were knee-deep in the Insomniac breach data that did come out. But either way, we should not be too far away from seeing the game on their terms, which will be exciting in just a few weeks. If not that, then the TGAs, hopefully. Moving on to Lost Soul Aside, where the studio is trying to address a number of problems with the PS5 and PC version of the game with a new patch. There's been a few bug fixes, but mostly it's actual gameplay optimizations, is what they're saying. So things like adjusting the NPC animations, the attack mechanics, I guess the autosave in Chapter 4 was kind of brutal, and then difficulty adjustments for the puzzles, increasing rewards on harder settings, things like that. I would presume that's not going to dramatically change this game from a 6 out of 10 to a 7 or 8 out of 10, but definitely making it a little bit more lenient and easier for players that are trying to get through the game right now. I'm kind of in the same place with this game where, in a weird way, it's like more appealing to play something that maybe didn't completely stick the landing, but it's good to know that by the time I eventually get to it, maybe some of these really rough edges that would make the game kind of unbearable are being spruced up. So that's always great to see, and that patch is live right now on PS5 and PC. Moving on to the 30th anniversary for the original PlayStation, which was on September 9th, 1995. So it's been 30 years since the PS1 came out, and in a very cool fashion, Matt Piscatella of Circana, which tracks video game sales data here in the US, has shared the top 20 best-selling games in PlayStation history, both top 20s ranked by $1 sales and one by units. And it's kind of a depressing chart, if we're being honest, because it is primarily dominated by Call of Duty games based on dollar sales and units, but there are some differences. So number one, unsurprisingly, by dollars and units, is Grand Theft Auto 5. But units is Minecraft for number 2, whereas Modern Warfare 2019, that is number 2 for dollar sales. Red Dead was able to get number 3 on both charts. And then you've got Grand Theft Auto San Andreas for units on PlayStation 2, which that's where the difference will come in as far as like dollar sales versus units. Obviously, the average selling price for games is a lot higher nowadays. So dollar sales is going to lean a lot more modern. Although one outlier is number 10, you can see Guitar Hero 3 Legends of Rock, because that game sold very well and it did have an extremely high average selling price with all the bundled in guitar equipment and things like that. But you can see a handful of standouts there. Marvel's Spider-Man, number 11, and then also Spider-Man 2 at number 18. So a very recent modern PlayStation release on PS5 and more recently on PC. That was able to crack number 18, and then number 19 for Miles Morales as well. Going back over to units, though, you can see God of War 2018 and The Last of Us and Miles Morales all spruced up next to each other. Marvel Spider-Man was actually a bit higher on units, on the unit side of things. That's at number 6 right there. But it's a fascinating list for sure. Again, I think a lot of it is in a way depressing, but also like that's the thing. Call of Duty has always been this driving cultural force in the gaming landscape. It also really illustrates how big it is for like a casual audience, because there is a casual audience of console players and buyers that, you know, they may buy 1 or 2 games a year. And those 1 or 2 games a year are going to be your Call of Duties or Madden, 2K, whatever the case is, but Call of Duty is typically quite high on that list. This also, I think, really illustrates why Sony was so motivated to be against the Activision Blizzard acquisition. Because that is, you know, look at what these games sell on PlayStation hardware historically. I mean, that is of course a big concern when at the time what was still a traditional console competitor, your competitor is acquiring that publisher and that valuable IP underneath it. So it's always definitely eye-opening when you see the sales data come in. In other sales data news, we also have PlayStation 5 hitting a pretty big milestone in Japan, where based on some Famitsu data coming in from the week ending September 7th, disc consoles, digital, and pro consoles have now amassed over 7 million total sold in Japan, which may not seem like a very impressive number. Obviously, we know consoles have not been doing nearly as well in Japan in recent years throughout the PS4 and PS5 cycle. More so, that's a PlayStation problem because Xbox is basically non-existent there. But to compare that to PS4's lifetime sales, PS4 is just under 8 million, so it's really not that far behind, and PS5 still has some years to go, so reasonably speaking, it might hit that number or exceed it. But when you do compare it to the Switch family of systems, that is at 35 million. So, you know, Nintendo has dwarfed PlayStation now at this point. But this, I think, really illustrates the upside of a local play PlayStation 6 handheld. Because a part of that conversation, too, very fascinating enough, is that there are people that are straight up missing now at this point from the Xbox side of things, because that hardware has dropped year over year, double-digit percentages every single time since 2022, I think it was, which was pretty early. So, you know, there's always this like ceiling on how many consoles get sold in every given console generation, but now there is some that are just straight up not there anymore. So there's upside to recapture that on PlayStation 6 with the traditional console, the handheld. Then the handheld could do very well in Japan, especially by the time it does ship. It would be the, you know, you would think de facto place to play high-end third-party games on a local play handheld, and that might be very appealing to the Japanese audience next to the Switch 2. Maybe it might be, you know, too late at that point as Switch 2 becomes more and more mature and established going into its life cycle, but still there's a lot there for the PS6 family, so to speak, to do much better, not just globally, but definitely in Japan. Now, on the topic of PlayStation 6 news, that was a very big rumor that we talked about as a breaking news story video on, that would have been Monday, but we will mention it here again very briefly, which is this rumor came out from Tom Henderson, writing for Insider Gaming, that PlayStation 6 will have, yet again, a detachable drive, much like we have right now for the existing PS5 Slim and Pro consoles. And apparently Sony is very firm on doing this because the existing drive has hit all the company's internal targets. So in theory, based on what we're hearing from Tom, you can buy a PS6 with or without a disk drive, and you could even buy it later for your digital console as well. That's what we're hearing right now. I'm still in the same place from the Monday conversation. I think it's great news. There's still concerns for that one online handshake with an online server that may or may not be there in 20-something years, but PS5 and PS6, I would gather, probably still has that issue of the SSD being soldered onto the board. So there's the life expectancy is even lower from that itself. So that's still an issue. But it's still great news. I think having disc playback and the option there is always very consumer friendly, and it's something I will always advocate for, because when you purely buy digital, you're more than welcome to. That's your preference. If that's your preference, that's fine, obviously. But I would always advocate for the option to buy from different storefronts, and you simply do not have that with a digital console where your only store is the PlayStation Store. I would rather have retailers fighting for my dollar and buying a disc as cheap as I can possibly get it, and it's great to know that PS6 will be able to offer that. Moving on to a big PlayStation 6 rumor. This one is hot off the presses, mere hours ago, but we do have what appear to be the full PS6 spec sheet from Tom over on their YouTube channel, Moore's Law is Dead. They previously had the spec sheet for Canis, the codename for the PlayStation Local Play handheld, the PS6 handheld, and now we're hearing the full spec sheet for Orion, which is the PlayStation 6 home console. So this is claimed from Tom, seeing recent AMD documents where PlayStation 6 is a 280mm squared monolithic die based on TSMC's 3nm process, with a 160 watt TDP, which for comparison's sake, PS5 Pro with active 4K gaming averages around 215 watts. So combine that with the process size. We also keep hearing that Sony is really focusing on making this console a little bit smaller, simpler design, really being more mindful of pricing, the ongoing trade war, and the thermals and the die size alone will tell you that they're in a pretty good spot to have the bill of materials not be as crazy as what we've been experiencing during the PlayStation 5 cycle, to at least be a little bit more price sensitive. But we are also hearing that the console will have 54 RDNA 5 CUs, with 2 possibly disabled to increase yield. The GPU is organized into 3 shader engines with 9 work groups each, so 27 total, but again, one of these would be disabled, and that's how you would get to a 52 count for the CUs. There would be 8 Zen 6C cores, and then 2 Zen 6 low power cores reserved for the OS. Tom is unsure if any of these cores would be disabled for yield, but for memory, it's a 160-bit bus, 32 gigabits per second GDDR7, which Tom estimates it could be a total of 30 to 40 gigabytes of RAM based on whatever pricing is available for Sony. Of course, more is obviously better, and for the possibility of AI, more is really what studios are demanding. They want some headroom for AI. But manufacturing is set for mid-2027, with a fall 2027 launch being likely. The documents do clearly point out that the LP cores for the OS, that should free up about 20% performance on the CPU side, which that's unlike the existing PS5 console, where that does eat into the standard 8 cores that the console does have. Now, rasterization is expected to be 2.5 to 3 times higher than PS5, but Tom really does drive this point home across the 20-minute video, is that it's the ray tracing side which is expected to see a massive leap of 6 to 12 times greater than PlayStation 5 right now. Which Tom doesn't even really have to, make that point across the 20-minute video, because that's what we saw and heard directly from Mark Cerny, the system architect of Vita, PS4, PS4 Pro, PS5, PS5 Pro. That seminar, I know we showed this footage a lot, but it could not have been more black and white when the architect of this console, PlayStation 6 presumably, is telling you rasterization is not where meaningful enhancements are going to come with generational leaps. It is going to be the ray tracing side. It's going to be the ML side. And that's a portion of how Tom opened up this video, is this sort of pitch of what studios are going to be doing with their next-gen experiences. And that, right now, to have all these sort of different things in games, and when I mean things, I mean something as simple as an animation for the way a grenade explodes, or the type of different NPCs you will see in a game. What if ML is coming in and creating all these variations of how you throw a grenade, how a building blows up in the way that you caused it to blow up, or being able to talk to NPCs and getting a very bespoke answer based on what you were saying, and there's no sort of preset dialogue trees, and this, that, and the fourth. We all know how AI can really advance the experiences that we're having right now, but that's part of the pitch. And that's also kind of what I always got at with AI and AI use, is that there's a safe, reasonable way to navigate it when it comes to protecting the labor that we have right now. If it's additional and it's not impeding on human work, then I think there's a lot of meaningful things that we can see in our games when it's used responsibly like that. And that's, from a big multi-billion-dollar public corporation like Sony. That's my concern, is that I don't want to see people lose their jobs over this stuff. But if it's a better product, maybe putting out products slightly faster, although I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case. But there's a lot of potential there, right? And that's how PS6 could be able to differentiate itself versus the type of experiences that we have right now. That, and also it is ray tracing. It is, maybe an occasional path tracing game here and there. Lighting is so important to the way games look. And games are super scalable nowadays, so that's the other growing fear amongst this idea that Sony's walking into a new generation where it will be a developer mandate to also accommodate this performance profile for Canis, the local play handheld, which may also have this companion low-priced console that is basically a PlayStation TV 2.0. It's basically a Canis APU put into something that's not a handheld, but instead it's just a plug-and-play box, which, people are referring to that as another Series S situation, which, would that be the case? Sure. I think the issue still is we've got more of a ceiling on how many studios can even push the boundaries of technology nowadays versus the hardware that they're trying to make and accommodate for. If we're starting to put behind PlayStation 4 and X1 spinning HDDs, then, that would certainly be a pretty reasonable minimum that's bumped up from where we are right now. But it's hard to say a Series S situation when this is not a Series S. It's the handheld performance profile put into a console form factor, if that is what Sony's doing. But they likely might do that, given that they want to be so conscious of pricing and balancing that fine line of how do we make something that looks and feels next gen, but is also price sensitive in these uncertain economic times of the trade war, whatever sort of tariffs they may or may not be dealing with. But at least for PS6 proper, to stay on topic, the die size and the heat dissipation, this is going to be a big thing that will determine the actual physical size of the machine, and that will play a big role in what that's going to cost them to manufacture, ship, and fulfill this thing to stores and to homes. That's a big part of why they're always so conscious of even trying to remove just a little bit of weight from the retail box, as an example. They can pass those savings on and try to make this thing not $700+, but maybe something that is closer to the $500 or $600 neighborhood, and it still feels like a reasonable next-gen leap in the world of diminishing returns. But I still find that PlayStation 6 is positioned in a way where it will be able to visually stand out from the games that we have right now. That's my personal opinion, and I find that by the time Sony's ready to pull the curtain off PlayStation 6, that's a lot of what they'll be talking about, is any sort of AI enhancements that some of these early PS6 games will be utilizing, but also the ray tracing benefits as well, which are no compromise benefits, because it will be ray tracing on top of, high frame rates, high resolution, next-gen FSR stuff, next-gen PSSR stuff. There's still a lot of headroom there. Let's move on to some third-party news, beginning with this, which is a very small progress update on Kingdom Hearts 4 and also the next part for Final Fantasy VII Remake. So, recently speaking, during the second anniversary live stream for Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis, Square's Tetsuya Nomura provided a comment on the status of these games, saying, and I quote, "Right, so looking at the comments, I'm seeing people ask every so often about the third entry in the Remake series. Apparently, Toriyama mentioned in an interview that something might be released around the second anniversary of 7 Ever Crisis, so that's probably where those expectations are coming from. Right, so things are progressing really smoothly. I can't really say more. If I suddenly went, well, actually, everyone would be really surprised." They then went on to say that the release timing for the game has already been decided, and as for Kingdom Hearts, they said, and I quote, "This has also come up in the comments here and there, but Kingdom Hearts 4 is likewise steadily moving forward according to schedule, so please look forward to it." So there's really not much here being said. I do find it is pertinent info that they've set the release timing for 7 Remake Part 3, because I think that game is closer than some initially would think based on how there's been 2 prior entries, and they've got a lot of established assets. The team is there. They know what they're doing. It's It's the sort of sequel approach of we've got a foundation, it's easier to get that second game and then third game out the door versus the first entry to get the game off the ground, right? So I think it's closer than some would believe. Now, as far as when they want to formally announce it, that is an entirely different story, but I would not be surprised at all if this thing is only a few years away from actually being released and playable. Next up, Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater has sold 1 million copies day one, so that's based on Konami's own internal metrics that they did choose to release, which is good to see. I think that bodes well for the Metal Gear franchise, and moreover, we're hearing from Konami's presence at TGS that they do have 1 or 2 game announcements that they will be revealing on the 26th. So new game projects, that could be anything, but also we're still expecting the MGS Collection Volume 2 to finally be announced, which there's the big thing about that potential release is having the PSP entries, but also MGS4 as well, which will be the first time that game ever leaves PlayStation 3 natively. So it'll be a big deal when that finally does get revealed, but publishers do tend to, like to have these things lined up with adjacent product announcements and releases, so I would think that Volume 2 is really not that far behind, especially with the sort of high that everyone's on right now for the Metal Gear property. Moving on to more game subscription concerns in the video game business, which does relate primarily to Game Pass, which is a service I would think Microsoft would still love to have on PlayStation, but they've probably made zero headway on that actually happening. But it's pretty eye-opening when you have former Xbox staff also coming out pretty openly against the model that Microsoft was pushing internally based on their time at the company. So Pete Hines, the former senior vice president of global marketing and communications at Bethesda, he left in 2023. Well, recently he was speaking with Double Tap about his career and getting into the topic of Hi-Fi Rush from Tango, that launching on Game Pass, and then the studio getting shut down. Pete Hines said, and I quote here, "I'm not working in any of these companies anymore, and so I don't assume that everything I knew while I was in the industry still holds true today. At the same time, I'm involved enough to know I saw what I consider to be some short-sighted decision-making several years ago, and it seems to be bearing out the way I said. Subscriptions have become the new 4-letter word, right? You can't buy a product anymore. When you talk about a subscription that relies on content, if you don't figure out how to balance the needs of the service and the people running the service with the people who are providing the content, without which your subscription is worth jack shit, then you have a real problem. You need to properly acknowledge, compensate, and recognize what it takes to create the content and not just make a game, but make a product. That tension is hurting a lot of people, including the content creators themselves, because they're fitted into an ecosystem that is not properly valuing and rewarding what they're making." Now, naturally, you had this generate a lot of headlines, and Sean Layden, the former chairman of Worldwide Studios, shared the story on Twitter saying Pete's, quote, "nailed it." He's been pretty outspoken about subscription and Game Pass. But it doesn't stop there. We then had Shannon Loftus, the former VP of Microsoft Xbox Game Studios, who left in 2022, provide a comment on the story on LinkedIn. Quote, "As a longtime first-party Xbox developer, I can attest that Pete is correct. While Game Pass can claim a few victories with games that otherwise would have sunk beneath the waves, Human Fall Flat as an example, the majority of game adoption on Game Pass comes at the expense of retail revenue, unless the game is engineered from the ground up for post-release monetization. I could and may someday write pages on the weird intertensions this creates." At this point, the topic has been sort of beaten to death here, so I don't know if we want to spend too much time on this again, especially with our next story that kind of goes into the other end of how these deals can be very favorable for studios. But it does say a lot when you have some very high-ranking staff, former staff from Microsoft, that internally there was a lot of friction as far as should we really do this, because this has a lot of implications, this sort of trickle-down effect to the hardworking people that make the games that ship on these services. Because there is that sort of push and pull as far as the premium a la carte way that games have always traditionally been sold, and then offering those up for $10, $15 a month. I mean, there's just something has to give, and part of it too, I'll add this, right? We always get, stories left and right from studios on how it'll save their game. Again, that's going to be our next story coming up. How it saves the game, or it exposes them to a much bigger audience. it puts that studio on the map. I mean, don't get me wrong, those stories are there and they're real. But those studios can come out, or rather those stories can come out, I should say, because they're favorable to their own situation. The deals that go south, you don't really get to hear those because it doesn't really look good with your publishing partners. It doesn't look good with the platform holders that you want to ship games onto. You know what I mean? Like, you can't be as open. You can't air grievances out when it's going to be in direct conflict of the partnerships and relationships that you build in the industry, right? So I think it's pretty noteworthy to always put that out there as far as the stories that we do here that are often good for a game launching on PlayStation Plus or Game Pass, is that you're not always going to hear things that are very clearly NDA'd or just straight up it's a conflict of interest when you want to complain about how your Game Pass deal just did not really work out for you. So anyway, going into our next news story, Sword of the Sea, which launched day one on PS Plus Extra last month. That game, apparently, Sony saved it. So we got the story over on GamesIndustry.biz, where they spoke with Giant Squid's creative director, Matt Nava, about the game and how Sony saved the project with their Indies program and PS Plus Extra. He said, and I quote here, "We wouldn't be here without them, even before this game. But on Sword of the Sea specifically, we were able to work with Sony directly. Halfway through development, as it usually goes, you need a little more cash to get it out the door. Things take longer than you think, they will, and you need that extra funding." He goes on to talk about the trade-offs, saying, quote, "On the one hand, you're giving away the game for free to all of these people who had already subscribed. But at the same time, way more people are playing it. You're getting more eyes on the game. And that's tremendously valuable as well. You never know how that balance is going to play out for you and your specific game. It can help you, or it can hurt you." So again, much to my point from the previous story, if there's something good to be said, they've got a lot more wiggle room to actually say those things, and there's no repercussions. And that's not to undermine Giant Squid's experience with PS Plus or any other studio that takes a Game Pass or Plus deal, because that's not uncommon in this business, is like, uh-oh, we're out of money. Now we wanted to self-publish, now we can't. Let's go find a publishing partner. Let's go knock on the door of some console manufacturers. Maybe they want to spin up an exclusivity agreement or something, whether it's on Plus or not. We actually hear quite often about PlayStation is that they are a great partner for any sort of deal that they want to work out. But that extends to the same point I was making. Like, you're only going to hear that stuff when it works out really well for the studio, and that's what you want too. Like, I want these teams to come out of these agreements ahead and not burned on the deal. It's just, as far as optics and how these things usually make it to the press, like, that's how it always works out. The question I have, though, definitely with PS Plus Extra, that is the difference, right? Is that Extra and Game Pass, like, they're comparable, but they kind of aren't as far as the numbers, because Game Pass, as recent as of this year, was over like 35 million something subscribers. PS Plus, well, Sony stopped reporting Plus numbers a few years ago now at this point, but for the base tier was like at its peak 48 million or something. They're always around 45 million, give or take a little bit, but they've gotten up to like 48 million at one point, but that's essential. These games are launching day one typically, sometimes it's essential, but typically they launch day one into PS Plus Extra, which is a higher tier, and there's not nearly as many people on there. The last number was 15 million, I think, between Extra and Premium, and both those members would have access to this game as an example, but that was in 2023. We know that more people are subscribing to those tiers, so conceivably it's more closer to, 18 million maybe between Plus and Extra, or Extra and Premium, but that still is not quite the comparable number to Game Pass and how many more people games are exposed through that service. The numbers do logistically look a lot different when it comes to paying your partners and also their a la carte sales as well. Like, not everybody is on PS Plus Extra, whereas on Xbox platforms, a lot of people tend to, they buy the Xbox and they get their Game Pass subscription as well, and they're sort of set up for big AAA releases, and that's not the cadence you expect on Extra and Premium, so much less people subscribe to those tiers, and therefore there's still this general buying habit of, oh, Way of the Sword is out, I'm going to go buy that game. You know what I mean? So while that seems anecdotal, you do know for a fact behind the scenes the numbers probably play out very differently, and I wonder if because Extra is just this weird middle ground, maybe it does work out in a more favorable fashion for every partner involved, that being Sony, the studio, and any sort of intermediate publishing partner. In this case, Giant Squid was trying to self-publish themselves, so there was no partner in that agreement, but I wonder if it works out a little bit better there versus Game Pass. Not to say PlayStation's definitely better, but I'm just curious if the numbers do work generally better that way versus Game Pass, where it's exposed to far more people. Moving on to some PlayStation Productions news for the God of War Amazon TV series. We are hearing from sources speaking with Nexus Point News that the Amazon series is filming very soon, within 6 months or something like that. So they're starting principal photography in Vancouver next year, and casting is underway right now. And again, filming will begin very soon. We also saw from John Campea over on their YouTube channel. Allegedly, they have a really good, reliable track record in the movie and TV space. I don't know. I can't speak on that, but they were recently posted on the Gaming Leaks and Rumors subreddit, where they had a recent video about the rumored actors that are in the running for Kratos, which is Winston Duke, Joe Manganiello, Christopher Judge, Manu Bennett, Jason Momoa, Travis Fimmel, Oliver Richards, and Dave Bautista. Now, again, I can't speak to the validity or reliability of Jason Campea on their channel. I don't know TV film stuff, so I really can't say. The names sound okay, about what you would think. I mean, the weird thing is like Christopher Judge, because he's got a lot of health issues that he's openly aired out before, and even doing the mocap for Ragnarok was a challenge for him. So I feel like that's fan casting that's maybe meant to lead us astray from who is really going to get the role. So I don't know. Christopher Judge would be amazing if he could do it. I think when you can line it up that perfectly, I'll take it. Like, I want the adaptation to be as truthful to the source material as it can be, and so Judge, I think, could do it if he physically could. But everyone else, I don't know, remains to be seen. Momoa would maybe be a bit strange. Bautista, I think, would be a natural fit, but also Bautista, like, he sized down to get wider roles, and I feel like doing Kratos would be stereotyping himself back to the roles that he wanted to walk away from, or at least not walk away from, but, you know, he wanted to give himself more opportunities to not necessarily the big lug of a guy, right? So even though Kratos from the Norse mythology has more emotional range, and that's something Dave does want to do from what he's always talked about openly in interviews, but that's the big question mark. Who is going to be Kratos? I think that is going to be maybe a harder casting to do versus, you know, like a Joel in The Last of Us, or even Drake from Uncharted, which that was Tom. Obviously, Tom Holland, you know, arguably that was a bad choice. But I think for Kratos, there's a lot riding on who's going to fill the role of that very big, burly man and how they carry themselves through this series. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X. And for this week, we have a code giveaway, 3 codes to give away for the upcoming release of Henry Halfhead on September 16th on PlayStation 5. We have 3 codes to give away, courtesy of Pop Agenda. Henry Halfhead is a quirky sandbox adventure game. You can like jump into different objects and be anything, so it definitely is one of those very weird, different sandbox style games, which you know I love this stuff. It's like right up my alley, so really cool to give away 3 codes. So if you would like to win, it's very simple. Follow the link down below or scan the QR code, enter the Gleam giveaway, and we are trying to give away a code for Henry Halfhead next week on LTPS. Those are all the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and our Monday breaking news story video was about PS6 and the disk drive rumors, so you can go check that out and see what's going on there. We had Click R3 episode 31 last night. That was live streamed. Now it should be archived by the time you're watching this. You can go see the new episode of Click R3. And again, as a reminder, on September 27th, Saturday from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m., I will be at my buddy Rob's Retro Game Store, Retro Rehome in Mount Morris, New York, for his 2nd annual trade night. Going to be really fun. If you're in the area or maybe an hour or 2 away, come make the drive out, come through. Going to be really fun to talk games, buy, sell, and just hang out, have a good time. I'll be there, and that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.